What's up, folks? So today we're going to be discussing Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, which is book 2 in the First Law trilogy. In this video, I'm going to give you my thoughts on the book. We're going to do some spoiler-free thoughts up front, and then we'll get into some spoiler reactions in the second half of the video, so stick around for that if you've already read the book. Without further ado, let's just get into my spoiler-free thoughts on book 2 and my general thoughts on this series so far. So overall, I really enjoyed this book. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 total for me, which means I really liked it. It's one of those books that's just a damn good time to read, in my opinion. This book is spoken very highly of. Many people say really incredible things about this series and about Joe Abercrombie. So I don't know why, but I feel like I'm being overly critical for some reason when I say this, but so far, this isn't one of my favorite things I've ever read. It's very, very good and very enjoyable, and I'm happy I'm reading it. I'm definitely going to finish the series, and I'll probably read many more Joe Abercrombie books, but I just wouldn't put it up there as like one of my favorite books of all time. That isn't exactly what I was expecting based on other people's reaction to the book. Now, what I will say about this book is that there were some characters in the first book that I wasn't a huge fan of or didn't particularly like the way that they were acting in the first book, which I've now changed my opinion of them, and I've started to really love them. I'm much more on their side and like rooting for them to succeed moving forward in the series. Then there's also characters in the first book that I believed in or that I thought were going to be, I thought were going to be heroes in the book for one reason or another, and now I'm starting to doubt their intentions. So in that respect, I like that Abercrombie's doing that. Like, he sets you up in the first book to think, to give you a certain perspective on some characters. The characters progress as they should, obviously. My perspective changed quite a bit in the second book, I'll say, and definitely for some characters for the better, some characters for the worse, but for my overall interest in the series, I think it was a good thing, because now I'm very interested to see how things pan out in book 3 of the series. I think one spoiler-free thing that I can mention that I disliked about this book is that there's one particular storyline that involves a lot of walking and then camping, and then walking and then camping, and then progressing to the next location, and then we're camping again, by a river, and then we're on the mountains. And to be honest, like, I don't know if it's just because I've been reading too much fantasy recently, and that's kind of an overused trope, characters journeying from point A to point B. But I don't know, I found it to be a little bit boring, though obviously there is action involved along the way that spices things up and keeps your interest. But if I was going to say anything negative about this book, it would be that particular storyline. Now, obviously, there's some good conversations that happen along the way that develop these characters, like I was mentioning earlier, and those are things that need to happen, but it was just this one, I don't know, I just wasn't a huge fan of this particular quest line. I actually found myself much more into the other two perspectives that were like the main storylines in book 2. Just to wrap up my spoiler-free thoughts, basically, really enjoyed this book. It's not my favorite thing ever, but that's not to say I wouldn't recommend it. I would definitely recommend it to a friend, because I think Abercrombie has a very distinctive writing style, and definitely a distinctive style in the fantasy world. It sticks out on its own, and I think that's something that people should experience for sure. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to book 3 and finishing up this series. So with that being said, let's jump into some spoiler thoughts. One thing in particular that I really liked about this book was the opening sequence where Dogman is by a river and he comes across this corpse within the river with an arrow in it, I believe. Just the way that Abercrombie laid out this first 10 or 15 pages of Dogman finding the corpse and then like finding another corpse. And then he goes a little bit farther and there's more. And he's just finding out, he's like, he goes from realizing, one person was killed to there was a massive battle and basically a giant massacre happened. I found that the opening to the book was incredibly cinematic, and it definitely drew me in immediately. It's very easy for me to picture that as a scene in an HBO series or something similar. Another scene that I really enjoyed was Glokta arriving in Dagoska, or however you pronounce that. But the first time he arrives in the city and introduces himself to all the key players, like the prince and the leader of the spice merchants and the general of the army, all these different characters, they make it very clear up front that they're not going to let him manage the situation and that his position doesn't really have that much power, but very quickly he flips the table on them, essentially, by delivering this order that he's received from Archlector Sult. I definitely had a major turnaround when it came to Jezal in this book. I went from hating him in the first book and just like despising his character to warming up to him and now very much appreciating his character and the change that he's made. Obviously, I think I was set up for that, right? Like, I think you're supposed to kind of dislike or disapprove of the way he's acting in the first book. But once he is kind of severely injured about midway through the second book, he kind of makes an about face, you know, which I think this is something that is, it's pretty relatable where, you know, somebody has a near death experience and then all of a sudden becomes way more appreciative of the things that they have in life. Even if maybe the conditions aren't the best, they begin to appreciate that they're alive at all. I just think Jezal's character starts to become way more likable about halfway through this second book. And finally, he's there with Logan, who is this incredible warrior and has all this combat experience. And Jezal at first is kind of trying to just pretend that he's confident enough to do the job throughout this quest, when really that's not the case at all. But after he gets injured, he becomes way more open to taking Logan's advice and listening to him and learning from him. That was just a really nice thing to see. And I'm going to imagine and predict that Jezal is going to have some sort of major leadership role by the end of the series, or by, you know, maybe it won't happen in the third book, but if I don't even know, do these characters continue on past the third book, or are there other series that include these characters? I'm not sure, but if there are, I'm going to imagine that Jezal's character will grow into some sort of major leadership role down the line. It was interesting to see Pharaoh and Logan start to have this like romantic interest in each other. I mean, I think again, it was something that was set up in the first book. You could kind of see the very like beginning of it. I don't know. I'm not like a sucker for love stories in my fantasy books. That's not exactly the main thing that I'm after. But I think given these two characters and how strange they both are in their own respects, they're made for each other in some ways. I wasn't exactly a fan of the sex scenes. I don't know. I felt like they were pretty, I don't know. It was just a bit much, but maybe that's the whole point of, you know, Abercrombie's style. Is just like keep it realistic, keep it in your face kind of thing. That's all I'll say in regards to that. But I don't know. It was something to make note of, that's for sure. The pure frustration that I felt in that first battle when Prince Ladisilla, whatever, I don't know how to pronounce his name. But when the prince is leading that first battle, I could feel West's frustration through the pages of the book. I mean, that was brutal to watch. And very well done. Like the way that whole battle sequence was set up. I mean, obviously we kind of knew going in that they were screwed, you know, but the anticipation that was built up was very good, and I think that feeling of frustration just really came through in a way that we were supposed to feel. So given that, you know, that frustration and that agony you had to feel as you're watching the prince just totally butcher this battle in every way in the days and weeks leading up to the battle, and then also during the battle itself, it made it so much more satisfying when West finally kills the prince. Now, that was something I wasn't exactly expecting. I thought that the prince might die for one reason or another, or was set up to die at some point in time. But the way that Abercrombie kind of throws you into this action sequence with West, where West is with the Northmen, or the named men rather, and they're killing off this small troop of other Northmen from Bethed's army. Yeah, West just comes out of combat and he's on his way back to make sure that this woman, Cathiel, is okay. He's trying to check on her, and he finds out that the prince is taking advantage of her, or trying to at least. And similar to the first book, West just snaps and proceeds to kill him. And I think, I don't know. I didn't see that coming. And I was definitely surprised, and I think it was just a very satisfying moment in the book, 100%. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. I was like, okay, yeah, I was over that Prince character and ready for him to be gone one way or another. So the fact that West was the one to do it felt good to me. One thing I didn't like is how we never got to see how the siege of Dagoska ended. Now, obviously, we know how it ended. Probably everybody was killed or captured by the Gurkle army. Given that that was a large section of the book and we watched we watched the siege take place, and we watched Glokta kind of orchestrate this defense of the city. Even if the city was going to, be captured and taken, I was kind of looking for one chapter to just kind of go over how that happened, whether or not the mercenary captain ended up siding with the Gurkle people, or whatever was going to happen. I was interested in how that was going to pan out, and I felt like it was a little unsatisfying that we didn't get to see that, even though I understand how the fact that Glokta was like pulled out of that situation and didn't get to see it through. I understand that was a good move for the plot, right? It showed kind of the ruthlessness of Glokta's organization and Archlector Sult, that he would just basically he's just defending the city for political purposes with no actual aim of helping the people involved. And as soon as it becomes expedient to him to remove Glokta from the situation, he's like, okay, it's over, and basically just leaves everybody else to be killed. So that's just one thing I would have liked to see different in the book. I mentioned earlier in the spoiler-free section that I didn't particularly like the Bayaz perspective, where they're going on this quest to find the seed. Now, obviously, I didn't give the details in the spoiler-free section, but there's something about the whole process of when characters in a fantasy book go on a quest, and they're like traveling and then camping, and then on horseback and then camping, and then we're walking through mountains and then we're camping again. I don't know, I find that it gets a little bit boring. It's a very necessary part of the books. It could just be that I've been reading too much fantasy recently, and this is a me problem. But I felt like there was something a little bit dull about that particular perspective for a long period of time. Things do start to pick up and get more interesting as they have different encounters, whether that be with the different emperor's servants who are trying to capture them, or when they reach the city of Ulcus, which is that old empire capital city that's dead. That was a great sequence. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, just something about the whole travel experience. I found it rather dull, to be honest. And I was constantly like, okay, I'd rather be with Column West and the Northmen, or I'd rather be with Glokta in Dagoska. And as I think about it and talk about it out loud, I guess that was probably intentional to a certain degree, because Column West and the Siege of Dagoska had most of the action up front in the first 2/3 of the book. And then the quest that Bayaz was on had a lot of action in the last third of the book, if I remember correctly, followed by finally the Siege of Dunbrec. But yeah, overall, wasn't a huge fan of that storyline. That's what I'll say. I did find it interesting that Abercrombie kind of starts to sow seeds of doubt, no pun intended, in regards to Bayaz throughout the book. Like, you go from totally believing in this guy, or maybe not totally believing in him, but he seems to be this powerful wizard in the first book. Like, he's got all his shit together. Like, he clearly knows what's going on when the other characters do not. But in the second book, it starts to become clear that a lot of the other magi in this world have a very different perspective of Bayaz compared to what he presents himself as. Now, obviously, all of these magi are flawed in their own ways, but it does start to sow some doubt within the reader, or at least it did for me, in regards to Bayaz's intentions. And also, I'm not really sure, now we're starting to learn all this lore about Khalul and the Master Maker, Canidius, anyway, all the other magi that came before Bayaz in this current era of magi. It seems like all of that drama that happened in the past wasn't as straightforward as it was originally delivered by Bayaz. It doesn't seem like that. Maybe there were more details to that story than what he's presenting. And then you have Bayaz's apprentice, who, is definitely there for the journey and has his moments throughout. But it seems like he knows something that the other companions of the journey do not. And he doesn't seem to be giving his full perspective. At least that was my interpretation by the end of the book. So I'm definitely curious to see how this all pans out in the last book. And maybe we'll get some clarity in regards to Bayaz's true intentions and what's really going on with the seed. What are his real intentions with this object? Even though he obviously doesn't even retrieve it finally at the end of the book, and that this whole journey was a waste. Which actually I did really enjoy. I like that they got to the end of this very long quest and did not get what they were looking for. It would have felt too straightforward if they went all the way there and were able to just, pick up the seed as was expected. I like that there's probably going to be another step they have to go through in the next book in order to find it. Yeah, I thought that was a nice twist. It was good that it wasn't just a very straightforward ending in regards to that storyline. So the ending sequence of the book, the Battle of Dunbrec, I thought that was very well done. It was quite an epic battle, and I liked that Colin West ended up in this position where he kind of had to become general for a moment and take command of the army, given the fact that Burr, I believe it was Burr, gets sick and can't, he can't command the army because he's just violently ill. And so in order to keep morale up, West is kind of like standing outside the tent giving orders to the respective messengers for each part of the army. I really liked that. I thought that was cool, and it kind of gave West a good moment to shine, especially after being so restricted in the first conflict, right? Like, there's really nothing he can do about the fact that the prince is fucking up that first battle. But finally, in this last battle, he can participate in a way that affects the end result. And I felt like that was really fun to watch play out. We had a couple of deaths, obviously, in the named men's little band. We had the death of 𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒂, that woman. I have no idea if I'm saying that name correctly, but I'm just going to go with it for now. Somebody's going to correct me in the comments. That was a sad, heartfelt moment with Dogman realizing that she's dead and that there's nothing that they can do. It didn't hit me that hard, though. She wasn't with us as a character for that long or in that meaningful of a way that it really hit me in the gut, I would say. I mean, I was sad for Dogman that he had this little bond for a second and then it disappeared, or was taken away from him rather. I don't know. I didn't find it that impactful. But what I did find impactful was the death of Three Trees, who is really he's a barbarian, but in the grand scheme of the book, he's a pretty honorable dude, siding with the Union against 𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒏 and kind of delivering this kind of old man style wisdom, stoic wisdom to the rest of the group throughout the book. I really enjoyed his character, or had come to enjoy him. Despite these barbarians being so brutal, they become some of your favorite characters, I think. Yeah, it was kind of a bummer to see him. I guess it was a fitting end. It was against a giant, so it was like a fitting enemy to lose to. And it was done in a way where he was saving the rest of his guys. But yeah, I found that to be the most sad. Yeah, it was definitely the most sad death of the book, in my opinion. It was definitely the death that impacted me the most in this book, I will say, is the death of Three Trees. But it does set up Dogman to be the lead frontman of this band in the following book, so that'll be curious to see if he can rise to the occasion. So I think that's all the major points that I wanted to hit on before they are hanged. Like I said, I really enjoyed this book. It just never really hit that next level for me where I was totally blown away, but I am very excited to read the third installment of the book. I've actually already started listening to this on Audible. I read the first two books on Kindle and I really enjoyed doing it that way, obviously, but everybody raves about the audiobooks. All I hear is incredible things about the audiobooks. So I picked up the Audible version and started that yesterday. So we'll see if that has an impact on my overall perspective of the series, because from what people say, it seems like some people actually prefer the audio version of the novel than they do to physically read the book. I don't know. Curious to see if it has any impact on my thoughts on the series. But yeah, like I said, really enjoyed it. Gave it a 4 out of 5. If you enjoy the content that I'm creating on this channel, please like this video. And if you have any thoughts about this video or this series, drop a comment down below so that we can have a discussion about it. And subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this in the future. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see everybody in the next video.